You're listening to Faith Community Church's weekly podcast. We hope this week's message from God is insightful and an inspiration to you.
Thank you. I'm going to put my tacky Starbucks cup over here on the communion table because I don't have a better place to put it. When I'm done, if you see me start to leave the stage at the end of the sermon and I don't grab that, would you all collectively yell at me to make sure I don't leave that here at the end, because I know I'm going to forget. Anyway, good morning. My name is Adam, as you heard. I am a high school teacher, as many of you probably know. I've been a high school teacher for most of my adult life, and I don't know how broadly it has spread through the church, but like some news that happened in our family this summer is that in the fall, I'm going to be going back to the place I not only started my teaching career, but where I graduated high school myself, Monte Vista Christian School out in Watsonville. I'm very excited about that. My wife, Rachel, will also be teaching out there and directing the drama program. So we're both very excited about that. We have a long history at Monte Vista. I'm really excited to be going back there where it kind of all began for me. So I've been thinking a lot about high school. I've been kind of cycling through memories. This fall will also be the 30th reunion of my graduating class and the 100th anniversary of Monte Vista as a school. So I've just been very nostalgic thinking about my time in high school. And one thing as I was preparing this sermon that came into my mind was, I don't know if it was like this for you, if you remember this, but when I was in high school, the college recruiters and stuff that would come talk to us would talk about the importance of clubs. Like, you should be in a club. And you know, I didn't start high school with that in mind, but I took their advice. I'm like, okay, so I was in the chess club, which was pretty fun. But they stressed it wasn't just good to be in clubs. It was even better if you led clubs or started your own clubs. So a couple of friends of mine and myself, we started a brand new club, which was the Beverly Hills 90210 Club. That went on my college applications. I was the founder I was a founding member of the 90210 Club at Monte Vista Christian High School. And basically what we did in this club was get together every week and watch 90210 at somebody's house. We would rotate different people's houses. My friend Kip Lyons, who I think probably many of you know, and my friend Nicole, the three of us would just sort of schedule people's houses and go. And there was usually, I would drag, Rachel and I were dating back then, I would drag her to them. There was usually 5 to 7 of us at someone's house watching the show. I don't even know if you came most times because I know you didn't love the show. But I don't know if you guys remember this. In the fall of 1995, there was a special episode of 90210, and they really built it up. There was a lot of advertising for it because Dylan, you guys remember Dylan? I'm trying to figure out, am I preaching the right crowd? You guys remember 90210? Luke Perry was the actor, if you guys remember him. Dylan was going to get married on the show, but he was marrying a mob boss's daughter. And there was all this conflict and tension, and all of the advertising leading up to this episode was that he was going to die. It was really suggestive of that. Does anybody remember this? It was kind of a big moment in the fall of 1995. And our little club, which normally had 5 to 7 people gathering someone's house, for that week's episode, there was 50 people there. It was a major event in our school. It was a packed house. But of course, you know what that means. There's 4 of us that actually want to watch the show. And there's this crowded house of a bunch of other people who aren't even paying attention. And I got so ticked off. I'm like, hey, are we here to watch the show or not? And so, did I also have a picture? Yeah, this is the picture of, you remember? I had to look at this picture. I'm like, oh yeah, that was the woman he was going to marry. Spoiler, she got killed. Not him. It was awful. But I was very, I had to see this episode, and I was so annoyed at all the fakers all the fake fans who were coming to this, this event to watch this episode and were not interested at all in what this. I'm like, why'd you come? Why'd you even come here if you're not here to watch the show? Did you already get the whole point of my sermon? Maybe not. Anyway, that was my annoyance in that moment. There was a clear differentiation between the small core group of us who were on the narrow path of loving 90210 and everybody else who was just there to socialize. Okay, so we're in a series right now that Tara started for us last week called It's Like This, which we're looking at various parables in the teachings of Jesus. Last week, if you were here, if you remember, Tara opened it up with the parable of the sower, which is a really fantastic parable to start a study of parables in because Jesus actually tells you why he teaches in parables. In that parable, he uses a parable to tell you why he teaches in parables. It's pretty interesting. Because, the various seeds go out, the same seed, that was very important in the parable. The same seed, which represents the word of God, falls on various kinds of soil, which kind of represents the varieties of different kinds of peoples, degrees of openness within their heart, right? That was last week. And Jesus is clear that the reason he uses these really evocative stories is surprisingly not actually the opposite. He's actually like wanting his hearers to have to chew because he knows some just won't. And he's like, good. For those who don't want anything, you don't have to have anything. The message is sort of veiled within this puzzle that they're not going to bother to piece together. But for those who want, there's wisdom there. Same seed, different soils, different kinds of people. This week, I'm going to do the immediately following parable. Right after the parable of the sower, Jesus does another farming parable. But it has a bit of a different point. So let's read this together. This is Matthew 13. I neglected to write down the verse numbers. But if you open your Bible, it's right after the parable of the sower, the parable of the weeds. Say it again. 24 through 30. Thank you, Michael. It's also up here on the screen. Let's read it together. Jesus told them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a man who sowed good seed in his field. But while everyone was sleeping, his enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat and went away. When the wheat sprouted and formed heads, then the weeds also appeared. The owner's servants came to him and said, "Sir, didn't you sow good seed in your field? Where then did the weeds come from?" "An enemy did this," he replied. The servants asked him, "Do you want us to go and pull them up?" "No," he answered, "because while you are pulling the weeds, you may uproot the wheat with them. Let both grow together until the harvest. At that time, I will tell the harvesters, first collect the weeds and tie them in bundles to be burned, then gather the wheat and bring it into my barn." He likes his farming metaphors. This parable leaves lots of questions. And all of his listeners were kind of wondering. I'm sure they had their questions. I certainly have my questions. But it's interesting that, if you're reading in the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus just moves on and tells another parable. He goes right into another one, again about seed. He really had agrarian things going on in his mind. But later on, if you go further down in the chapter, when Jesus is all parabled out, his apostles come to him and they ask him about this one. They're like, "What was that one about?" So if you go down to verse, 36 in Matthew 13, correct? Thanks, Michael. Jesus again explains the parable. And this is what he says. Then he left the crowd and went into the house. His disciples came to him and said, "Explain to us the parable of the weeds in the field." He answered, "The one who sowed the good seed is the Son of Man." That's Jesus' favorite phrase for himself. "The field is the world, and the good seed stands for the people of the kingdom. The weeds are the people of the evil one, and the enemy who sows them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the age, and the harvesters are angels. As the weeds are pulled up and burned in the fire, so it will be at the end of the age. The Son of Man will send out his angels, and they will weed out of his kingdom everything that causes sin and all who do evil. They will throw them into the blazing furnace, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Then the righteous will shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. Whoever has ears, let them hear. That's how Jesus makes his point clearer. That's his explanation. It's a lot. And this is the only other parable besides the parable of the sower that Jesus does this, where he tells kind of a, detailed, multi-point parable, and then later on goes through it point by point. He's like, here's what everything means. That's the only two parables Jesus does that for. And this is week 2 of a 7-week series of teaching on parables. And Tara and I got kind of the cheat sheet in our parables. I hope everybody else does okay with the ones they have to teach, because Jesus doesn't do this for the other ones. But for this one, even with this cheat sheet, I still am left with a lot of questions, right? So like the sower, in the parable of the sower, in the parable that Tara did last week, the seed was the message, right? The seed stood for the message. It was the same message that went in all to the different soils. But here, the seed now represents people. So it's like similar imagery, but it's being used to very different purposes, and you kind of have to start over with what the images mean. Here, the seed stands for different people. The difference, Jesus is contrasting two opposite kinds of people. And it's not a difference of degrees, like it was with the parable of the sower, right? You had the very open soil, and then there, well, actually, that's at the end. It starts with the path, just a very hard soil that the seed can't get into at all. And then there's the kind of rocky soil where the roots can't go very deep. And then there's the soil with the weeds, right? It's all kind of nuanced differentiations between kinds of soil, and that nuance disappears with this parable, right? There is good seed that is from God, and there is bad seed that's from the devil. It's this sharp binary. And that, as I read this parable and I'm like, oh, I'm going to preach on this. Whoa, that leaves me with some serious questions. What does Jesus want us to take from this? I'll say this. Are we supposed to take from this a sort of binary image of humanity? That there's just the good ones and there are the bad ones. And then if that's where we start, how do I know which side of that differentiation I'm on? Lots of questions, and we're gonna process some of them. But I want to start with a baseline of 4 things I'm pretty positive Jesus wants us to see in this parable. 4 things I think Jesus wants us to know. Number 1, the kingdom has fakers. Number 2, they are of the enemy. Number 3, they will be dealt with eventually. And number 4, for now, God leaves them here on purpose. This sort of mixed, seemingly undifferentiated situation between wheat and weeds. God is aware of it. He leaves it that way on purpose. Okay. So then the questions are, if these weeds are from the devil, but they're intermixed among the wheat, and they're in some sense sort of faking their place in the kingdom, why would someone do that? And on my side, does Jesus want me to have the existential crisis I automatically do when I see a parable like this and wonder, wait, am I a faker? Am I here for the wrong reasons? Am I one of the ones he's seemingly calling out here? Why am I here? Is it just kind of like with the 90210 Club? Is it just sort of for social reasons? And am I supposed to have a kind of deep existential crisis about that? Maybe I'm not here for the right reasons. And I don't think that is the point of this parable. Because again, with the parable of the sower, there's all these kind of degrees of differentiation between the soils, and there's struggle to keep your soil like tillable, or I'm not a farmer. Keep your soil good, right? The work of sort of tilling the soil is a struggle that Jesus understands. And this parable doesn't seem to be about that. It's not about the sort of like struggles that might differentiate the good and the bad. So I don't think that the point here is the kinds of existential crisis of like, am I here for the right reasons? We are drawn to church through like being drawn to people, and through people we encounter God, and I think that's the way it's supposed to be. I don't think that we're necessarily supposed to quake with like, is my faith authentic? I think to understand Jesus' point here, it helps to remember the context that if you read this chapter full of parables in its larger context in the Gospel of Matthew, it's framed everywhere by his conflict with the Pharisees. So much of what's going on in the Gospels, in us, our ability to understand Jesus' points depends on us having a sense of who the Pharisees are. And to like really get that, it's helpful if we have a strong background in like the Old Testament, because that sets up a lot of like what's going on in Jesus' day and who the Pharisees are. But to make it very simple, or as simple as I can, sort of for the sake of this parable, the Pharisees themselves are weeders, right? They're kind of doing the job the people in the parable are offering to do to the owner of the field. Like, hey, should we go, pull up these weeds? That's like the Pharisees' mission within Israel in the first century is to like make it righteous, to get the sinners out, like separate the sinners from the righteous. And I think they think they're doing a fairly good job, right? That's kind of how they frame their mission, is weeding God's field. And even despite all of Jesus' conflict with the Pharisees, Christianity has had a long history of temptation to follow suit with the Pharisees and be weeders, to try to rigorously separate the righteous from the wicked in real time, right? Like if you go back to the early church and you read about the Novatians or the Donatists, those were both movements in the early church that were doing kind of a similar thing. They wanted to set up rigorous standards to separate righteous people from unrighteous people and do that in real time, right? So you can kind of see in Jesus' parable here, he's saying things like, God will take care of that at the end of the age. For now, let them grow together. Don't do the thing the Pharisees are doing. But then I think once you sort of see that that's kind of, probably what Jesus has in mind as he's telling this parable. The surprising thing, again, as you see within the context of Jesus' larger ministry, is that he sees the Pharisees themselves as the weeds. They think of themselves as the righteous ones that are there to weed the garden. But Jesus is like, no, you're actually the weeds. He's telling his audience in this parable that quite often, the ones standing for God the loudest are the fakers. Because, and this is something, again, you see Jesus just constantly diagnosing. What do the Pharisees really love? They love being greeted in the marketplace. They love being, treated with this kind of high reverence. They love power and prestige. That is what makes them of the enemy. What they love, right? It's not like in this parable, it's not like degrees of different struggles for loving God versus loving something else. Jesus deals with that in other parables, like the parable of the sower. But here he's like, okay, even if you could just sort of base this basic differentiation, he's maybe drawing on what he had said in the Sermon on the Mount chapters earlier, where he says, you judge them by their fruit, right? Look at the Pharisees. What do they love? Do they love God first and neighbor second, as Jesus has already made clear is this is the way of the kingdom? Or do they love the place they have by virtue of their office, of their ministry, the respect they're given from the community, the power they wield within that community? That's what they love. that makes them of the enemy, no matter what no matter how they present themselves. And so, yeah, that kind of brings us back to that existential crisis I was talking about a minute ago. It's like, wait, can a good seed become a weed? And 3 chapters after this story, when Jesus tells his crowd, or he tells his apostles, like, what's going to happen when they get to Jerusalem, that he's going to be rejected, handed over to the Gentiles, and crucified, Peter, one of the ones who, he's a good seed. Peter's going to go on to become a sower. He's going to be like one of the great leaders of the sowers who are going to go out and, I will make you fishers of men. In that moment, when he tells Jesus, this can't happen, Jesus says, get behind me, Satan. In that moment, Peter is putting his sort of vision of the kingdom, which again probably involved quite a bit of power and prestige, putting that ahead of what Jesus says his stated mission is. So Jesus makes it clear to him, buddy, you're playing for the other team. Right? So, are you going to follow me, or are you going to follow this vision you have in your head? So, with those things in mind, that Jesus wants us to recognize that there are fakers in the kingdom, that they are from the devil and they'll be dealt with. But for now, God leaves it all the way it is on purpose. What does he want me to do with that? Again, let me say what I think I see Jesus pointing us to in this parable, having chewed on this a bit myself. Number 1, recognize the fakers. I think we need to develop sort of a rubric for differentiating genuine sort of expressions of Christian faith versus inauthentic expressions of that. We have to remember that the Pharisees, these are not, I've been teaching high school for so long, and I've seen how often within high school kids' minds, when they read passages like this, their mind just sort of differentiates between okay, there's good people who love God, and then there are bad people who don't care about God. And then they tend to get the Pharisees all wrong. And they're no, you gotta recognize the Pharisees were highly respected as people who loved God. All they ever talked about was God and God's law and obedience to God. And so Jesus is giving his audience kind of a high challenge. Be able to recognize people by their fruit, not what they say. What do they do? What do they love? What is their treasure that they pursue? It's gutsy of Jesus to call them out. But he does give people a rubric, right? Judge them by their fruit. Who do they spend their time with? Who do they serve? Is their fruit the things that not just Jesus talked about, the prophets all talked about in the Old Testament? Love of the poor, the widow, the alien among you, the persecuted. Do you love not just your neighbor, but do you love your enemy? Do you do good to those who do bad to you? Do you pray for those who persecute you? That's the fruit Jesus is saying the Spirit produces. And if what you're seeing in these people is just a love of power, recognize them as of the enemy, no matter how they present themselves. No matter how much someone talks about God or Jesus or the Bible or good old-fashioned family values, look at what they love. Judge them by their fruit. Don't let anybody guide your faith as the Pharisees were seeking to do if it's not clear that what they love is the values of the kingdom and of what Jesus himself talked about. Don't let them set your normal. So that leads me to my second thing here. Recognize their fakers. Let Jesus be our model. I think the whole Bible is so concerned with how and who we let set our normal for us. Because that's kind of a deep, unconscious thing. The environment we immerse ourselves in is communicating to us at a really basic level what normal is, right? I know when we moved to Scotland, I don't know if you guys knew that. We moved to Scotland 15 years ago, something like that. And I know Rachel and I were really interested, and so were all of our friends back home, if like our kids would adopt Scottish accents, because we were going to be immersed in that environment. And so we thought that was a kind of a fun question. And I will say, Calvin did. Mercy was a little too young. There was a little bit of one in her, but she was mostly home with us. Calvin went to school, and he did develop a little bit of a Scottish accent. But I think what was more interesting and surprising was watching the way we started changing the way we talked. For me especially, I was in this this PhD program. I was spending all of my time with these ivory tower academics, and it was really interesting just experiencing myself start to talk differently. All of us that had this one advisor, guy John Webster, who had a huge impact in my life. He was like a British guy who was Cambridge educated, and he talked like that was normal for him. And then we were all around him all the time, and he had these really interesting affectations. My favorite one is if I asked him a question, or if any of us asked a question, and he didn't just want to respond with, "That's stupid." He wanted to kind of think about it for a minute and then, give a thoughtful response. He would take his palms and shove them into his eye sockets and pull his face off. Right. That's how he would respond. You ask him a question, he'd be like, right. Well, I wonder if you've considered, and then he tells us why we're stupid. And so we would get together and have theological conversations, and we would start realizing like somebody would make a point, and somebody else would respond by rubbing our face a lot and going, right. Well, this was the environment we immersed ourselves in. That started to become our normal. And then I came back to Santa Cruz, and I worked in a church for the next 4 years, and it took me years to wash all that ivory tower talk off of me. It took me years just to be able to talk about God and use normal people language, and speak at a normal people amount. Because there, you ask a simple question, you're gonna get a 20-minute response. That's kind of what we were there for. We want to go deep. And then I'm in a church environment where they just kind of have hey, I read this verse, what does it mean? I'm like, all right, sit down, here we go. And they're like, and I just get the deer in the headlights. But that was normal. That's what we immersed ourselves in. Jesus is doing his ministry in an environment he knows that the Pharisees are dictating the normal to the community of believers in Israel, and Jesus is passionate about pushing against that. Don't let them be your normal. Look to me. Abide in me. He's calling his disciples to listen deeply to him, and he's calling us to do the same, to make Jesus our normal, which requires some effort. Once you recognize how deeply you're influenced by the environment you're immersed in, you have to take some steps to shift your immersion, right? You got to spend some time with Jesus and let what he's saying actually redirect what I think normal is. And I say it. I think it's even more difficult to really let Jesus say what he's saying. Even within our sort of church community and our church culture, we have ways of watering Jesus down, of keeping him from saying what he's so clearly saying, right? And I think devotional books and stuff can be very good, but they also can do this. They can sort of break Jesus' teachings down into bite-sized chunks that sometimes rob them of their power, kind of de-radicalize him. And if you read him, just at length, in the books God gave us to read him in, the 4 Gospels, he's radical. And I think we got to take efforts not to sand the edges off the radical things he wants to say. He wants those to become normal for us, but they can't if we're just ignoring what he says or taming what he says with strategies of being yeah, I know he says that, but what he really means is, no, let Jesus be our model. Third, I think what Jesus wants us to see in this parable is don't lose heart when the fakers are revealed. The way he talks about that they're both growing and then they sprout, right? The wheat comes above ground and buds and reveals what it is. And at the same time, the weeds do the same. They reveal who they are. And that can be a very disheartening moment. If you've ever gone through something like that, if you've looked to a person, seen them as really admirable, and then all of a sudden you realize like, oh, maybe I put more trust in a person than I should have. The story on this 12 years ago, maybe it was, 10 years ago, Mark Driscoll, you guys heard that name? If you've never heard that name, I'd encourage you to listen to a podcast called The Rise and Fall of Mars Hill. Really influential church up in Seattle with a pastor who had a very remarkable rise. And I was definitely watching that rise in real time. And I was intrigued by the guy. I found many things admirable about him. Some things gave me pause. But I was certainly like, okay, this is a guy to pay attention to. And then he had a radical sort of ministry implosion. And what was really notable about it was that there was no revelation of like sexual scandal, no revelation of like financial impropriety. It just became too clear to the leaders working with him that he loved power too much. And it caused this whole thing to implode. And what's been really devastating is watching, because this was a large church with a big staff. And so you had a lot of people who were pastors working with Mark that when the whole thing went down, a lot of them just sort of left the faith. That implosion was too gnarly for them to endure. And I think what it reveals in the aftermath is like too much weight was being put on this human person so that his fall meant their fall. I think Jesus is warning us to avoid that here, right? He's like, look to me. Put the weight of your faith on me. Now, that's a complicated thing to say because I don't think it's possible to be a Christian without, joining a community with others and looking to other people's faith as a source of encouragement and inspiration. I think we're supposed to do that, right? I don't think the point of this sermon is steal yourself from others, isolate yourself, just you and Jesus, figure it out on your own without needing anybody else. That's not the point. It's just a bit more nuanced than that. This parable seems so black and white compared to the nuance of the parable of the sower, but working it out in how, what his message is does require some real nuance. I think it's God's plan, as I said, that we live in community, and that we draw inspiration from each other. But that environment that we, I think, according to God's will, create in a community like this is exactly what provides the opportunity for power-loving figures, right? They see the power of spiritual community. They're like, whoa, if I can get in that, if I can gain some status and prestige in that community, I could really, make something of myself there. I can gain some power. Jesus just seems to know the church, the kingdom is like that. To join in this thing I'm building, you're going to be in an authentic community and family of believers that will just also have these agents of the enemy embedded within it. And you just kind of need to know that. You need to get kind of comfortable in that space. Requires some the ability to love God first and neighbor second, but you can do both. Fourth, and I'm going to invite the band up as I'm making my fourth point here. But I think what we're meant to draw from this is the importance of finding ways of getting comfortable, being wheat among weeds. I think that involves a few things. I think, number one, even as we recognize weeds, we not seek to be weeders, right? That's precisely the problem of the Pharisees, right? That Jesus' teachings on how you, it's very popular in our culture to eliminate language of othering, right? Never talk about an enemy, right? Everybody's just friends. You notice when Jesus talks, he's not shy about differentiating between, people of the kingdom and enemies of the kingdom. He's very willing to talk about that difference. But He wants the people that are of the kingdom to know the way we operate towards enemies is by loving them, doing good to everyone, those who do good to us and to those who don't. Loving God, loving neighbor, and then remembering that neighbor is the person in front of me presenting their need, whether they treat me neighborly or not, right? Loving everybody. So it starts with that. Don't try to weed. The point isn't about judgment. We recognize that God will take care of that. That is a part of the teaching that makes our modern world so uncomfortable, and probably us too. That Jesus is being very clear. There will come a judgment, but that's not your place. Knowing that God will judge, you don't have to. You can love friend and enemy equally. Point is letting Jesus shape us, not them. We don't fight fire with fire. We don't fight the enemy by becoming like the enemy. I also think, to get comfortable learning to be wheat among weeds, we have to learn a very important balance of corporate and private prayer and worship, right? Like we do need to, like the Bible's so clear, Jesus is so clear about this. We need to join together. We need to lock arms. We need to act as community. But we also need to avoid putting the weight of our faith on anybody else, right? The weight of my faith needs to be on Jesus, not on this person next to me that I think really reminds me of Jesus. And it makes me think about Jesus. That's good. Let them do that for you, but don't let them be Jesus. We need to seek Christ together and seek him alone. It's not an either or. That maybe is the difficult balance here. Learning how to do both. That we would read scripture together as we've done this morning, but we would also read scripture alone, putting the weight directly on Christ. Worshiping together as we're about to do, and worshiping alone. Praying together and praying alone. Let's pray together.
Thank you for listening to this production of Faith Community Church in Santa Cruz, California. To visit our complete archive of sermons, to learn more about FCC, or to view our live streaming services, please visit us online at santacruzfaith.org.